Now, look, I have been telling you about Adam Creighton for years. Many now are starting to wake up. Many are getting the message. This is a very gifted young Australian who has now been offered with News Limited the job of the Washington, D.C. correspondent, and he's accepted. Good on him. And he'll continue, though, on the program with us. He has written tellingly about two issues in recent times. One is the question of debt, and the other is coronavirus. Here he is, Adam Creighton. Happy New Year and congratulations.
Likewise, Alan. Thanks for having me.
You'll be able to afford a new tie now. Now, we look forward to talking to you from America. When do you leave, by the way?
Of course. Well, I still have 2 more months here, so plenty of time to talk about Australia still, but I hope the end of March.
Good on you. Good on you. Debt. Now, just on the debt question, how do we retire the debt? The figures are staggering. 1.75 trillion in the next 5 years of public debt. How do we retire that unless we're prepared to grow the economy? And no one tells us how we're going to grow the economy.
Well, firstly, that 1.75 trillion, that's the forecast for 2024, actually. So only in 3 years. It compares 2019 to 2024. And yes, quite extraordinary doubling there. Look, the reality is we're never going to pay down the debt, I don't think. We just have to hope that over time the economy grows and the debt shrinks as a share of GDP. Now, that was much easier to do many years ago when the population was growing fast and when there was strong economic growth. But the problem this time is that there isn't either of those things, at least for the foreseeable future. So it's going to be much harder for governments to shrink the debt, if you like.
And what happens if the taxes go up, if the interest rates go up?
Well, that's a very good question. And so far, the reform agenda is really just one of hope. It's hope that interest rates do stay low forever. And, certainly it looks like they'll be low for a very long time. And just this afternoon, we saw the Reserve Bank announce another $100 billion of money creation. But look, you'd have to say from history that they're not going to be zero for 100 years. They are going to go up again at some point.
But see, all these two political parties talk about is jobs, jobs, jobs. Shouldn't the government spell out how they are going to grow the economy?
Well, the first step, I think, would be to lift all of these ridiculous restrictions, which I'm sure...
Correct. Get out of our road. Get out of our road.
There's basically no reform agenda on industrial relations whatsoever. There's just a very, very minor tweak in the offing, and there's been a tiny tax cut. That's really all we've had, frankly, from the coalition government on the economics front.
Just on this debt and all the rest of it, I mean, here we are. The response to coronavirus was really to borrow all of this money, and we're now talking about debts of $1 trillion. Surely it's time some of this stuff was challenged. I mean, why are we asked to be silent on government advice and the so-called health experts? I mean, you've rightly said coronavirus deaths in Australia are amongst the lowest per capita in the world. But we had people at the beginning, epidemiologists, the experts that Scott Morrison was listening to. Tony Blakely said 134,000 will die if there's no lockdown. And then these economists, Richard Holt and Bruce Preston, said 225,000. 1% of the population would have died without a tough response. I mean, isn't the illusion here that government has made a big difference? It's not true.
Well, yes, look, that's exactly right. I mean, I think some people genuinely think that, if we hadn't have done anything, 1% of the population would have died, which of course is completely ridiculous. But nevertheless, those are forecasts that people were making. Look, there is this illusion of control. There's so much triumphalism at the moment in Australia, which I find quite frustrating, that, it's our unique genius somehow that has kept deaths here relatively low. When, as you say, you go back through history, we had very low deaths in the Spanish flu as well. The idea that we were geniuses back there as well doesn't make sense. It's got far more to do with external factors beyond our control, like climate and geography, the fact we're an island, the fact the virus arrived late.
Well, just on that, Adam, sorry to interrupt you, the island. All the best results in relation to coronavirus deaths come from island states, Cyprus, places like Cyprus, Australia and so on. I mean, these people are having us on. And isn't it true that the total respiratory deaths in Australia were lower last year than in the year before?
Yes, look, that's true. It's going to be quite amusing in the future, isn't it, when historians look back and read all these articles about the deadly pandemic in Australia, and actually deaths were lower in 2020 than in 2019. I think it's going to be very hard to sustain both of those arguments.
You said...
Luke, that's
sorry.
True.
Go on.
No, that's right. Go on, Alan.
Now, you wrote, in what must be the greatest overreaction in health policy history, Western Australia's government put Perth, a city of 2 million people, in hard 5-day lockdown because one perfectly healthy man in his 20s tested positive. Why do we accept this?
Well, it's very strange. And look, it certainly must be the most extreme overreaction. And the Premier there must be a bit embarrassed 2 days on that there still haven't been any further infections. I mean, it's almost something out of Monty Python, really. I mean, he's surely hoping for at least 1 or 2 infections to justify the lockdown. But it seems like the claims that this man has gone around and infected hundreds of people simply, so far at least, aren't true. And of course, there's enormous economic damage from what he's done. But I don't understand why we're so obsessed with this particular set of health advice when, let's face it, most people in their private lives do not follow the so-called health advice at all, whether it comes to drinking or smoking or sunbathing or whatever. And yet on this particular health advice, it's an obsession. It's got to be cast into law.
Absolutely obsession.
And if you get fined if you don't do it.
Absolutely. And you said if the health advice is to shut down major cities for a week and put travel plans in disarray whenever someone tests positive on a PCR test for COVID-19, the health advice should be politely declined, thanks but no thanks. I mean, this health advice is unsustainable.
Well, it certainly is. And look, I mean, frankly, I'm so sick of hearing the phrase. I think that and the words safety and safe, they're the words I've come to dislike the most in the past 12 months. But, kind of when everyone questions this, the premiers and the leaders just say, look, it's the health advice. Well, I think it was once said about generals in war that it was too important war to be left to the generals. It was for politicians to ultimately make decisions and to weigh everything up. And yet for this, we've left everything to these so-called health experts, which no one had ever heard of before.
You and I don't need.
Not even doctors.
We spend all this money on education. We're apparently so dumb that we need governments to tell us how to look after our own health. I mean, exactly. You've made the point that federal and state government debt, this is staggering, will go from 42% of GDP in 2018 to 74% this year, which is a bigger increase than in any other country, but an increase of $640 billion. By the way, I loved your comment. Let's hope we've saved a few lives.
Yes, well, look, I was being a bit cheeky there, but it is extraordinary just to point out that the debt increase in Australia, state and federal governments combined, is larger than the UK, it's larger than Sweden, it's larger even than the US. So sure, we've had very few deaths, but gosh, we've certainly ramped up the debt. More than any other country. We've kind of blown one shot in the locker, so to speak, on this virus. So let's hope that we saved, let's hope we saved the 225,000 deaths that those eminent economists thought that we would save.
Good on you. Well, I think you're entitled to the final comment. And Adam wrote today, quote, "No sane civilization can lock down like this in perpetuity. It's time we questioned the sustainability and logic of the health advice." Good to talk to you, Adam. Lovely to talk to you and talk to you next week. There he is. Smart man, isn't he? Adam Creighton.